Super nice to have you. Gerry, it's good evening for you. It's evening in Singapore.
It's good night.
It's good night. It's good night. It's bonne nuit. Gerry, also past president, very recently past president of ISTAT, super involved, obviously still, and based in Singapore, chief commercial officer for Calc, and has been also in aviation for a while. Has done a lot of work at Merck's Aviation previously. So welcome to Roar. We will be discussing, I think the trigger of the discussion today will be around OEM issues and all of the consequences that it has on not just the airlines, the lessors, the MRO space. We talk about China, sustainability, a little bit on geopolitical uncertainties as well. But like the trigger of the conversation will be definitely the OEM supply chain issue, and particularly on the engine and all of the consequences this has, which will allow us to cover a lot of grounds. But before we get there, obviously, when we prepared for this conversation, which was amazing in itself, we got the announcement on Sunday that Alaska was buying Hawaiian, acquiring a Hawaiian for $1.9 billion, obviously subject to DOJ approval, which would take about 12 to 18 months or so. Want to have your take on this. It's obviously totally fresh off the press. So before we go into our core discussion as we had prepared it, and this is what is amazing about aviation, is like you never know what's going to happen. There's always a new surprise. And I think this came as a surprise. I think it was tightly kept very close. Nobody really knew. We knew something was happening, but we didn't really know exactly what was going to happen. So maybe starting with you, Jeff, what's your take on this Alaska Hawaiian story?
Well, it was a little bit of a surprise. I mean, obviously, in the M&A space and the airlines, it's a little bit interesting watching this. Having watched the whole Frontier, JetBlue, Spirit thing, where when it comes to the antitrust issues that those people were facing in the transaction that they're trying to do, and the question now is what is going to happen with this deal in that vein. And the first thing I thought of actually was Amazon's A330 operation, but we'll get into that later. But the second thing was that, Hawaiian has a pretty big market share of the mainland island market, close to 50%. And Alaska itself has 15%. And the question is that going to trigger any kind of an issue with the government? We'll see what happens. I mean, 12 to 18 months is a long time. A lot can happen in 12 to 18 months. And we see how the JetBlue Spirit discussion is going back and forth. First it's Frontier, and then it's JetBlue, and then, what's going to happen. The way I look at that JetBlue Frontier deal is that it's really a big airplane deal. Because, JetBlue goes to Airbus now to try to order aircraft. They're not going to get any until who knows when. And if they buy Spirit, they get a whole bunch of airplanes. I don't know if that's the same thing with the Alaska Hawaiian deal. The other thing that I thought of with the Alaskan Hawaiian deal was when Alaska bought Virgin America, eventually they got rid of all the Airbuses and stuck to their knitting with all Boeing narrow body fleet. Now they got everything, I mean, 787, A330, A321, 717.
Yep.
It's a big, diverse fleet. I know they're going to operate them separately, but in the DNA of Alaska, it's like that Southwest DNA of keeping it simple. So we'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting to watch.
Yeah, definitely. Gerry, how did you look at it?
I suppose if you just go back to the origins of Alaska in that Pacific Northwest corridor, they owned it, right? And they had an unbelievable loyal, let's call it fan base. or program with people around the kind of SeaTac area, and and they still do. They still have an enormous amount of support from people around that area, as you know, you live there. At some point, they were trying to figure out, obviously, where do we grow to now? And they were obviously very reluctant to go south towards Denver because of United and Frontier, and then further south because of American and Southwest. And then with obviously Northwest and Delta and Continental United merging, there was all these big bad clouds of competition floating around over here. But at some point, they needed to figure out how they were going to go east-west. And that was the only way they were going to grow, which is by a Virgin. The fact that I think it was an Airbus operator, or primarily a Neo operator, is what it is. They really wanted slots, routes, gates, times, etc. And I think that if you look against them crammed up against the Pacific Ocean at the moment, they can't really do a lot more going that way because the amount of LCCs that are suddenly involved. The only real chance they can go is to go west, and Hawaiian's probably as big as it can get in terms of west. So I think logically it can make sense. I think they can probably overcome the competition, issues and bring things down. I think I was reading an article the other day about it, and it was nearly verbatim the press release about why it was going to be good for the paying public as the Spirit JetBlue press release. And I suppose I'll ask you, both of you, maybe.
Yeah.
There's an election coming up next November, right? Obviously, you've got an incumbent president who may be under a little bit of pressure domestically. How much of this do you think, as you live there, you live and breathe in America every day, how much do you think that this is tweaked into that November election where the incumbent in Biden, really wants to ensure that, J-Blogs or the low-cost carrier is going to get, proper fares, or is going to get treated fairly, Do you think that plays into it, then, the political side of things? Like, if this happened 2 years ago, or it's just one of these things that just take time?
I don't think so. I think there's so many other things on the political side. I mean, this is not going to rise to any kind of an issue with any voters. I mean, I don't think it's going to be a thing at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you agree that the timing is interesting, right? As the JetBlue is sitting with DOG waiting for their, which I think is coming out this week, if I'm not mistaken. But maybe they didn't have a choice on the timing either, because Hawaiian needed to probably get something done. So I don't think there's a political outcome. I agree with Jeb, but the timing is like, why now? Considering that the DOJ has their hands full with the JetBlue Spirit consolidation. So it would be interesting to see how that pans out.
I always had a thought that Alaska wouldn't be the acquirer, but it would be acquired by American. Obviously the whole balance sheet impact of COVID, changed the whole dynamic there. But one world, common fleet, American is not heavy in the Northwest. I always thought that would be a thing. Obviously now that's not a thing. And then Alaska has to do what they're going to do in order to maintain their balance sheet and their strategy. And this is the acquisition that they're making. It's going to be interesting to see.
Yeah, it would be very interesting.
Plus, considering where the stock price was,
the Hawaiian guys did real well. But the Alaska stock went down 15% yesterday. So that tells you a little something about how people think about it.
Interesting. Wow. Very interesting. So let's go to the sort of the big question we had initially discussed and debated around, and maybe Gerry will start with you about the OEM issues, particularly the impact of what's going on in delays in general, but specifically on the engine side, and the sort of the trickling down effect it has on leases, trading, values, from on the airline side and lessor side. Gerry, maybe if you could kind of take us through what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, I suppose I live and breathe this, unfortunately, every day because we've got a big order book with Airbus of 123 aircraft. So coming over the next few years. So we are right in the heart of this every minute of every day. I think if you go back to basic principles, airlines are set up to carry a person from point A to point B. In order to do that, they need an aircraft. They need guarantee that they're going to have an aircraft in order to be able to have an operation, to be able to have flights and have routes. And if you can't guarantee that, there's a problem, right? On a very simplistic basis, that is, that's kind of the big issue, right? Is that you've got airlines that, there was always certain delays with manufacturers going way back when, but it's got to a scale now, and obviously we're not the only industry this is happening in. This is happening in the entire industrial world. It just happens to be very much at the forefront of our industry because lots of people want to travel. But what's the knock-on effect? The knock-on effect is significant delays, significant uncertainty, trying to appease our customers as best as possible with this uncertainty. What we are seeing now is that, I think the world has returned to pretty much, maybe China 95%, but the world has returned to kind of 2019 levels, and we're 2024, we're going to see even better. Cash collections are up. Demand for any aircraft type is up. So you're seeing, close to 100% on lease extensions of existing rentals. You're even seeing in some cases people paying reserves that wouldn't have paid reserves ordinarily before. And you're just seeing, I think, and there's been a lag, I think, in the last 12 months as this kind of settles out a little bit. And we've seen some airlines, I suppose they're getting a little concerned about, being drip fed information from OEMs, be them on the engine side or the airframe side. And they're trying to plan, right? And they just they can't plan for business in the next 12, 18, 24, 36 months. I think you're going to see a drought of aircraft on the new side over the next number of years. I don't think these problems are going away in the next 24 months. I think it's 3 to 4 years. Typically, industrial problems of this scale take significant amounts of time. It's not your carburetor in your car breaking down. I mean, these are massive problems, and some of it's the OEM's fault, some of it's not, right? But from our perspective, or from the world when we look in, lease rates are up, demand for aircraft is through the roof. Used aircraft suddenly is going through the roof. I have never seen an explosion of lease rates in the last 5 or 6 months in my 20+ year career.
Can you give us examples maybe on kind of midlife aircraft or example of how the leases have gone up?
I think new aircraft are nearly 20, 25, 30% higher today than they were a year ago.
Okay.
And I would see on used aircraft, I mean, you've got used aircraft coming in. You've got 10, 12-year-old aircraft coming in at nearly where A320 Neos were being placed 10, 12 months ago. So it's, some airline, I think you're going to see a bit of a leveling of the playing field. Some airlines are going to come a cropper because I think there is going to be a continued inflationary period. I think it's going to bite harder. I think there's going to be definitely some economic aspect to it. Some airlines are going to, I think, falter. Some with better business plans are going to do okay. But it's challenging. I mean, every day our airlines are at us going, when are we getting our aircraft? When are we getting our aircraft? And we're at the mercy of the OEMs to be able to deliver them aircraft. However, if you're sitting pretty on 10, 12-year-old aircraft coming back in the next 36, 48 months, you're probably looking at the world in a lot better place than you were maybe 10 months ago.
Jeb, on the trading side, I guess similarly, you've seen value up. Is it particularly narrow body, or does it affect the entire segments, narrow body, medium size? How do you look at that?
Yeah, it's across the board from my view. I mean, I agree with a lot Gerry's saying. I mean, the hole that was created by COVID for the OEMs production shutdown is real. It's real. It's established what that number is. It's somewhere between 3,000, 3,500 aircraft narrow body and over 1,000 wide bodies. It is going to take years to recover from this. The question is, how long can medium and younger used aircraft stay in the fleet in order to mitigate this? You have a lot of impacts. It's water in a balloon kind of thing, because if there are not enough aircraft, then fares go up. If the traffic stays, the OEMs are having a hard time getting back even to par of what they were manufacturing pre-MAX shutdown and pre-COVID. And those amounts are at the level of the normal market replacement, not replacing this whole number of aircraft that were never built. And so this is going to take years to shake out. In the meantime, used aircraft values stay high, lease rates stay high. For wide bodies, I mean, right now we're in the A330 space. When we started working on the A330, lease rates were in the low 200s. In fact, people were not even interested in investing in the aircraft. Now, A330-300 lease rates are pushing $400,000 a month. In some cases, I mean, there have been discussions, we've had discussions in excess of $400,000 a month. And I think the parlor game internally with us and a lot of that we know in the industry is, what's this going to look like in 24 months? Because if Airbus goes along at the same clip that they're going along with the Neo, the A330 Neo, that airplane is delayed. We're having conversations on aircraft that we own with people who, are not getting their Neos for several months, many months. Sometimes in some cases over a year, and they need the lift gap, and that is what is creating the value increase on this. The bigger challenge, and I know we're going to get to this, is the MRO situation.
Yeah. Because
if you have an aircraft that's on the ground right now and you have to do a big frame check, you have to do gears, you have to do motors, the lead times and the induction times for all those things are massively extended.
So I said like 18 months, you think 12, 18 months? I mean, 12,
18 months, easy. And you're AOG the whole time, I mean, there are ways to mitigate that. You can lease engines and, things like that. But we are in a situation now where we, on the A330s that we are working on, where we were proactive on getting a lot of this stuff done. I mean, landing gears, take a long time, a lot longer than they would normally take in a regular market. And so all these things, the engine situations that we have with the engine OEMs, all of them are creating this stress in the supply side of the market that will continue for several years.
Thank you. And I think Jeff, I think just a couple of things you pointed there. One is your planning for transition starts earlier now, right? Yeah. Because paint slots, try and get a paint slot in the next 6 months, forget about it. That's just absolute disaster, right? So so if your planning is having to start early for transition, your discussion on lease extension invariably has got to start earlier also, right? So you're forcing the airline effectively, because of the lack of, or the constraints that are within the MRO side, you're forcing the airline to make a decision earlier rather than later. And I think you're going to get an awful lot of tension within the next 24, 36 months between the leasing community and the airline community, because airlines are going to realize we actually need that aircraft, and you've actually gone and signed a lease with somebody else.
That's the
And
biggest, that's the biggest problem right now.
and
Yeah.
and we're seeing it, and we're seeing, you know, some fantastic customers looking to kind of bridge gaps to neos and stuff. But you might have somebody looking for a couple of year leases when somebody wants 10 years, right? And the reality is you weigh everything up. But you know, it is a lessors market at the moment. I think that there's a lot of airlines globally that I think probably need to use kind of coin of phrase, bite the bullet a bit earlier in terms of capacity. There's a lot of capacity, you know, for big airlines that are out there that are kind of, I think, are faltering a little bit in terms of they're not taking the capacity when they should. I think there's an opportunity cost there. Yes, they might have to pay something now, but their 2028 deliveries won't be coming till much, much further to the right. And you know, you've got to, if you just look at the order book situation between what's happened within the Middle East and other areas as well, I mean, I just don't see how the OEMs can ramp up to those levels, no matter how many deferrals they have in place. So there's going to be, you know, the airlines are going to suffer, I think, massively over the next 36 months, purely and simply because of these capacity constraints. And they're going to have to make, you know, they're going to have to make decisions far earlier than they would have about retaining capacity in their fleet, or they're going to lose it because you've got 7 or 8, you know, operators sitting there waiting to take it. It's going to become
for a
I
higher
think,
price, right?
The
lessors
question-
yeah,
are
it's
gonna
going to
be-
become quite stressful.
Yeah, the question is, what is going to be the price elasticity? I mean, at the end of the day, if you have fewer airplanes, I mean, you have a lot of these things that are going on now where people are having to put airplanes down for various reasons. Delayed MRO, you know, other OEM slots, gears and engines and things like that. And the question then is, what's going to happen with fares? So are fares going to go up because the supply of seats is down? And then the other thing is that, you know, the other side of that is what will be possible in the market. Will it get to a point where the fares hit a roof and people don't pay the fares? Right now, it's not a problem. I mean, right now, at least in the US, fares are actually going down. But the loads are still high. So at the end of the day, if you know, if this supply demand relationship continues, what is going to be the impact on fares, and how is that going to affect traffic? The other side thing on traffic that is what keeps me up at night is the political situation generally. Ukraine, you know, as it relates to Europe, NATO, what's happening in the Middle East, in Israel, what's happening in China. I mean, I think that has kind of calmed down a little bit about Taiwan, but still there's stuff going on, and, you know, maneuvering. Those are the things that are big concern, because if something big happens, if there's a war in Europe, for example, I mean, that's going to have an impact all the way across the board. So.
Yeah, but at the same time, you know, there's a lot of tragic events going on: Israel, Palestine, Ukraine, Russia. You know, to name just two, but there's a lot of other conflicts going on around the world which are unbelievably tragic. Aviation has been pretty resilient, in terms of a business, apart from, say, COVID. Last time before that, you know, in terms of a big, I would suppose, would be being around 9/11 Gulf War time, where there was, but that I would put that down as being a very different dynamic in terms of aircraft type that was around. You know, a lot of older aircraft got moved out of the system that were uneconomical. A lot of airlines with, you know, imperfect balance sheets got moved off to the side as well. So, you know, I am very concerned about what goes on from a humanistic point of view, what's happening around, the tragedies happening around the world. But I think from a a business and a macro perspective, I think that, you know, I go back to the old adage of we've movable assets, we can move it around. There's huge demand. And, you know, as long as things stay regional and stay somewhat in control in those areas, then I think the aviation sector continues to show robustness going forward. I would agree with you, Jeff, that if, you know, if it spreads out and doesn't becomes less focused in, you know, those areas and spreads out to a greater, wider regional issue, then yeah, potentially all bets are off. But we did think that about Russia and the Ukraine.
Yeah, the industry has taken a lot of hits in the last 20 years. I mean, not starting with 9/11, and then the financial crisis, and then COVID. I mean, those are big hits. I think the big difference is that during 9/11, the downturn, and after 9/11 and the downturn after financial crisis, the factories were still churning out airplanes. And so when the market came back, those airplanes were there.
Yeah.
That isn't the case now. And so used airplane values will stay high. And now the question is, how are we going to get out of this? I think as far as traffic is concerned, I mean, the whole, revenge traveling thing happened after COVID and is still happening. I mean, and the other thing, I think we discussed this in previous shows, was that travel now is just a fundamental thing. People travel for the most mundane things in air, by air. We do it, going to football games, going to concerts, going to see friends for the weekend. Popping out down to the airport and jumping on a plane isn't like it used to be jumping on a bus, and that whole behavior thing is something that I think is that, and that's all enhanced by guys like Wiz and Ryan and Spirit and Frontier and those guys where you can just run down and pay $35 and fly to Cleveland to go to the baseball game. It's cheaper than the Uber to get to the airport,
Yeah.
So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, you were mentioning the industry is usually resilient to shocks, which I agree with. But I think the COVID was a shock that structurally disrupted the aerospace industry in a sense that where pilots, mechanics were laid off, a lot of skilled labor was let go. It's very hard to get them back. So I think the post-COVID recovery is really difficult, which is why we are in such a supply chain issues and we can't find parts. So we're resilient, but we've taken a big hit, and it's going to take, as you mentioned before, a while to get back to pre-COVID OEM manufacturing equilibrium. Now, let's talk about the technical issues that the engine manufacturers are having. How is that affecting is it kind of adding to the issue we already have in delays? And how can you talk about obviously the GTF issues, and what does that mean for airlines?
So, my view on the GTF issues, Pratt & Whitney over the years has put out engines. The JT9 was the first one, and then the Pratt 2000 was the second one, and it had teething, had a teething period. And when everything got sorted, especially on the Pratt 2000, when the RTCCET came into play, which was several years after the introduction of the engine became probably the best engine on the 757. It's a great engine, still is. It's flying all over, Delta Airlines, Federal Express. I mean, this is flying all over the world, DHL. And I think that, their ability to fix this is going to happen. If they're going to fix this, what you talk about is the process of fixing it could have an impact on this supply demand, because people are going to have to put airplanes on the ground. The question is, what kind of capacity is going to replace that capacity when it's on the ground? The fix is going to happen, in my view. The question is, during the period of time of the fix, what is that going to have? What effect is that going to have on seat supply for those operators, which is just another thing. But I don't think it's exclusive to that. I think it's all across the board. We talk, landing gears and all the other things. I mean, everybody's juggling all these things, and it all comes from the supply and demand squeeze that is as a result of COVID. the interesting thing about the traveling public is when they decide they want to travel, it happens like that. Boom, they show up and they're at the airport. Whereas the supply side of it is impacted by all these supply chain things and the recovery of production by the OEMs, which is not as fast as the recovery of people going to the airport and buying a ticket to LA. And that is the challenge that the industry is facing. And it's going to be around for many more years. And in the meantime, used aircraft are going to see a resurgence, not a resurgence, but they're going to continue in service, you know. And the other thing that's
Jeff, then where does that, you know, obviously I know we're going to talk about SAF and ESG later on, but like the pressures that shareholders or certainly boards must be under to meet certain criteria, particularly of the large public airlines and lessors, that they have committed to, and with these delays and suddenly the incumbent fleet of, you know, COs and NGs being greater than what it should have been at a point in time in the future, you know, how does that play out, right? What does that just, it is what it is, and you know, your goals on ESG just get kicked to the right a little bit, because obviously that's not going to go down well with, you know, a lot of people in Norway anyway.
Oh, that's true. I mean, I think part of the problem that the big OEMs have is that it's very difficult to operate a business that has a strategy horizon of years with a financial reporting requirement of 90 days. And it's just doesn't make sense. I get it. I mean, you know, how the capital markets are structured and all that, that's fine. But that doesn't work, especially in this kind of a thing where you're looking at solutions that are going to take years to implement. It's you know, the impact of COVID and how it's impacting. You're reporting every 90 days, and this is not a 90-day solution. So that's the one of the problems. You know, as far as ESG is concerned, I agree with you. I guess the proof's going to be in the pudding. I mean, if things keep going on a climate basis the way that they're going, at some point the solution will overtake the problem, and people will realize, hey, we got to do this now. Again, I don't know if that's going to be new engine technology, hydrogen, whatever. SAF, but you know, the question is, what is going to be the motivating factor for people to continue to pay attention to ESG? Because you're right. Right now, it's just a damage control. We got to get seats. We got to, you know, we got to transport these people somehow.
Yeah, I mean, but on the SAF thing, I mean, you've got to start somewhere, right? It's not going to be the end game in 60 years time, right? But it has to start at some point. And, you know, there's lessors that are doing it. I think SMBC are massively involved in it. Boca did something on it as well. A lot of the airlines are kind of getting into this stuff. Is obviously the first transatlantic flight the other day. But I was reading a stat, I think, that there's between now and 2030, in order to get to 10% of jet fuel that's required by the aviation sector, that it needs to grow, SAF needs to grow 1,000 times. So it's at 0.1% at the moment. And you kind of think of those numbers, 1,000 times anything is a big number, right? And, you know, I look at it and I have, you know, I doff the cap to a lot of, you know, people who are really pushing this hard, because there needs to be a nascence, right? There needs to be a birthplace, and people need to push it, because otherwise nothing will ever get done. That's how things happen, and ingenuity happens, and stuff like that, and things get developed. But like it must feel like it's pushing water up a hill a little bit, because
but you're not gonna you know, look, SAF is a thing, and it's good, it's going in the right direction, but it's not going to solve the problem. I mean, the problem will get solved when we have new engine technology, and that's going to take 15, 20 years before it comes into play for a lot of reasons.
And the rest.
I mean, first of all, because the OEMs, especially an OEM which is in your area, Mylène, which I'm not allowed to use the name anymore, you know, has to sell a lot of their aircraft in order to get out of the situation that they're in. They got to keep selling these kerosene-powered airplanes. If new engine technology shows up and says, hey, this is the This is the new
But
killer
CFM, but Jeff,
works.
CFM have already said on record that there's going to be no new tech before 2040.
Right.
So
And I think
at the air show
you'll
last
hear
year, which
that
I
from
think
the other
disappointed,
Yeah.
which I think disappointed Boeing, obviously, because they were probably looking for a way out. But if you just,
Not sure about that,
if you
Gerry.
just,
I'm not sure about that.
I don't know.
They
We'll
want
see.
look, new engine technology shows up and people stop ordering kerosene airplanes. I mean, that's macro. But at the end of the day, you know, to get from here to there, the current OEM, the OEMs, what they're currently selling, they got to sell a lot of them in order to get out.
Yeah.
You know, and they want to keep selling them. And at the end, you know, if ESG is not being discussed in a major way, they'll keep selling kerosene powered airplanes.
But if you just use, say, the issues, obviously a little bit more minor on the LEAP, but also on the GTF that they've had in terms of their EIS over the last 8 years, the reality is that I would assume that there's going to be similar problems there was in the 5B, the 7B, and the Vs. You know, it's a 2050 issue in terms of when there's substance.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not going to trade.
You'll be cryogenically frozen beside me at that stage in Han Solo.
I mean, I think the industry is still continuing to try to find new technologies, new airframes, new propulsion systems, hydrogen, SAF. Yes, is difficult to produce, but there's a lot of effort because you still have 20,000 aircraft that you still need to continue utilizing. So you do have to find a solution for these guys before you get to produce new engines and new airframes. So I think it is an important effort, and I think the industry is still keeping a huge traction on trying to find a solution. But yes, it's going to be longer term. We had discussed something. I mean, what about China? I think an important part, Gerry, of the discussion we had last time, and you're very close to the area there, obviously, working for Calc. What's going on in China? Are we recovering? Are Chinese is Chinese traffic back? You know, is Comac? Yeah. Go ahead.
From our team in PRC, domestic traffic is back. I think there's probably some headwinds that we've heard about in the economy, but I think there's probably a Chinese fix similar to what there was a federal fix to the GFC for most banks and institutions. You know, when the GFC happened in 2008, I think there's probably a similar fix in China as well, domestically on the economic side of things. I think there's a little lag, probably a lot more than some countries such as Vietnam, Thailand, Philippines, Cambodia around this area would have wanted for. France even, I've heard that there's a massive lack of Chinese tourists going around spending their money on very expensive French clothing in Paris these days, and a lot of the shops are having big issues with it, right? So obviously, you know, international traffic from China has lagged a bit. You know, I would think that we're going to see that back with a flourish kind of end of next year into 25 on the international side of things. But domestically, things seem to be going relatively fine. You know, all I can look at is cash collection rates, utilization rates. We've got a lot of aircraft in China and all of them are up. You know, we're virtually at 100% of cash collection rates, and utilization rates are through the roof. So, you know, I was in Bangkok a few weeks ago, or maybe a couple of months ago, and, you know, there's this kind of visa counter where kind of a lot of Chinese nationals will come and they'll get their visa upon arrival. I mean, there must have been 10,000 people there. It was insane. And so I'm not going to say China was back internationally at that stage, but there's definitely that good feel push that is coming now, although I think it's probably lagged 6 to 12 months on international side versus what the rest of the world is. But honestly, Southeast Asia is doing okay internationally. Domestically is struggles. Vietnam is struggling, Thailand struggling, Malaysia struggling. You know, Southeast Asia is hasn't bounced back with the veracity that I think a lot of people thought it was going to be. If you went into 2019, really the kind of the driving force behind demand was coming from Southeast Asia and China, and that may still be the case at some point in the future, but it's not now. So we're not seeing enormous demand for aircraft in Southeast Asia at the moment, over and above what we would have thought we would have. It's really coming European, Americas, Middle East, where we're seeing huge pickup in demand. And now we're seeing a big ramp up in demand in China as well, which I think they've realized that COVID is over.
Jeb, what are your thoughts on Asia or China in general?
My hope in China, my optimistic hope in China is that they need us. They need the rest of the world as much as we need them. There's a lot of trade. There's a lot of tourism. There's a lot of both ways. And once that comes back, I mean, right now there is definitely a bit of a political stress that's going on vis-a-vis Taiwan and just generally. I don't know whether or not the Western travel to China is anywhere near what it was before the last 4 or 5 years. The bigger one for me is Russia. I mean, Russia, there's really nothing there. I mean, they don't make anything. They have oil. It really wasn't a big tourism. There was a little bit of tourism here and there, but and especially now it's closed. I mean, the whole aviation thing, that's a whole other podcast. But if Putin does something stupid and goes after NATO and engages with that, I mean, that's just going to have just a huge impact on, the rest of the market. And that is what worries me more than, as far as major things happening.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier, just on the COMAC side of things. I mean, there's one guarantee: China are going to build an aircraft, and a good aircraft, and a narrow body aircraft, and they're going to have lots of them, and they're going to be operating in China. That's
probably it, Gerry. That's probably it.
Well,
I don't think it's going to be a NASA or an FAA approved airplane.
We'll see. 10, 15, 20 years is a long time, right? They've got yeah. But look at the amount of facilities that are there now on the MRO side, on the OE or on the OEM side, that weren't there 10 years ago. It's enormous. They've got the best MROs in the world. They've got some of the best engineers floating around, and they've got 1.1 billion people who, if they want to push towards getting lots of aircraft in service, they will. So I think the interesting play in China, not imminently, but over time, is going to be what's going to happen the Western narrow bodies, right? Because I think that China Inc. is certainly going to push COMAC into its own airlines that are operating domestically at least, and will try to push them obviously internationally. I don't probably see a wide body being developed in China for quite some time. So I think that will be a boon for both Boeing and Airbus in terms of what their production capacity can go into. But it will be an interesting play to see how things are going to fare out on the narrow body side.
Yeah, you had mentioned though, Gerry, that China did see the impact of the supply and demand imbalance, because you were saying that the Chinese airlines used to traditionally move their aircraft after 12 years, and they no longer are doing that, and that they're now also converting their own aircraft, which it takes me to the cargo world. We haven't touched on it, and we wanted to touch a little bit on the impact of all of these OEM issues and delays on the freighter world. Maybe we can touch on that a little bit. Don't know who wants to start on the freighter side.
Look, firstly, if freighters, firstly, people have book value issues coming out of COVID. But if there's an aircraft that's 14, 16 years of age and someone's offering you $250,000, $260,000 a month to continue to lease it as a passenger aircraft. Why would you put $7.5 million or whatever the number is into converting it into a freighter? So I just think that there's going to be, plus I also think a lot of people jumped on the freighter bandwagon over the last number of years. There's an awful lot of narrow body freighter kit still around. There's still an awful lot that has to be supplied into the market. I think it's probably toppy. I think it's bottomed out probably where lease rates are going to end up. But there's probably enough capacity sitting around, certainly in the narrow body side. I think the wide body side is actually probably more interesting, or even the middle market side where, there just isn't slots. You just can't get aircraft. And, I think going back to Jeff's point, I still think that balance on 330s and other aircraft being developed in that size and scale might be interesting, but it's a big nut to swallow. I mean, you're putting a lot of money into an aircraft to be converted and to go on lease to somewhere else. And as Jeff said, you might be better off taking $400,000 a month, for 6 more years of a passenger aircraft.
Yeah, but the problem, once you put a hole in an airplane, you're done. You have a cargo airplane, and you have no option. If you don't, you still have the option to go to cargo. Yeah. I mean, cargo, the market seems to be, over the 40 years I've been in the business, is that it's either ice cold or smoking hot.
Or hot.
and if you're at the moment when it's hot and you have a freighter airplane, you're going to print money. And if you're in an ice cold market, you're going to be crying the blues. I think the challenge that the freighter conversion guys are going to have is that because of this hole in the market of the OEMs not building airplanes in the earlier part of this decade, that is going to have a big impact on feedstock. Because if, by definition, those aircraft last longer in passenger service at higher rates, the values, by definition, of those airplanes will be higher. Therefore, the cost of a freighter will be higher. And the question is, will that mitigate itself over the years? I don't think it's going to be the case for a while, at least. I hate to say this, Mylène, but for the A330, where if you're, like you said, Gerry, if you're a lessor and you have an A330 and you can lease it out for $500,000 a month,
you're going to extend
why are you going to turn it into a freighter where
you're not selling it?
You're not going to do it. So, and that's going to be a challenge. So, which means that then the cargo guys will have to go into older aircraft, maybe, and make different accommodations for that, or compromises. So it all is connected, because the freight market will come back. There's no question about it. It does. And when it does, the question is, what is the fleet going to look like on the passenger side vis-a-vis feedstock? That's going to be the big challenge for the conversion guys.
Yeah, no, definitely. We see it on, the 767 feedstock. There's a few things here and there, but there's not much. And then now on the A330, it's harder. So it begs the question of that mid-size segment plus new production freighter of that size is not there either. And this size of aircraft is ideal in the US and in China as well. So it's definitely a big question mark and creates a lot of uncertainty there. The narrow body is probably different because there's a little bit more supply, but then you can't.
Not in the 321, Mylène, not in the 321.
Yeah,
the 321.
That's true.
The 321 and the 330 are great airplanes. They're just great airplanes. And that the fact that they're great passenger airplanes is going to be a challenge to the cargo guys. I mean, obviously there were a lot ordered. Whether they'll get deferred because of the state of the cargo market, we'll see. But when the cargo market does come back and there's a need to bring those aircraft in, it's gonna be interesting to see that dynamic. So,
yeah. Interesting. Was there anything else? I think we touched on oil as well, but oil is the usual story of going up and down, right? And
until a time we don't have to talk about it anymore.
That's right. That's right. We kind of did touch a little bit on lessors consolidation, but you guys didn't see anything super exciting on the horizon one way or the other. Is that
the one company that has been super active on that is Carlisle, and always watching them because I just get the feeling that they're always on prowl to see what else they can they can buy. They digested Fly, they digested AMCK, and I guarantee they're not done. And so, in the case of lessor OEMs, I think that's one space to watch. The other one, it's some of these medium-sized companies like ACG and Aircastle, and all those paths go to Japan. And so the question is, what is the Japanese sensibility with respect to aircraft leasing strategy as a country compared to China, et cetera, et cetera. I think there's a lot of that going on, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, look, it's a way more commoditized world now in a funding environment that's 600-700 points higher than it was 4 or 5 years ago, right? So, you need scale. Investment grade is important to drive that funding cost down. Inflation looks like it's going to be sticky. So, how is that going to play in and drive, M&A type activity, right? You would think it's going to somehow, obviously, Avilease just bought Standard Chartered. I'm sure they're not going to be finished there. I'm sure there's other things that they can do. There's plenty of money. DAE, we did a deal with them. Obviously, this year they did a deal with Sky. There's an awful lot of, what I would say is not massive M&A deals going on, but people who are picking up a couple of billion here and a couple of billion here and a couple of billion there. I think we're going to continue to see it, right? I think people are going to need to understand the differentiation between value and growth. And there's a bit of a tug and war, I think, going on between those two aspects at the moment. Whereas, my price isn't the price that you want, but I don't have my $2 billion of growth a year. So how do I get that? And sometimes you might just have to pay up, right? And that's going to play through, I think, a little bit over the next 2 or 3 years as this kind of mess continues a little bit.
Interesting. Sorry, go ahead, Jeff.
No, I was just going to say, capital chasing airplane deals and RFPs is just in my view, is a race to the bottom. You're not going to get any scale that way. I think the M&A side, that strategy is the better strategy to build scale through M&A. But that's even becoming more difficult too, because those are processes as well. So just a tough.
But there's capital and then there's funding available, right? Some are talking about maybe ABS coming back. So the financing for lessors and for airlines is still kind of there and pretty available, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
It's there. It's expensive and the advance rates are too low, but no, it's there, and it makes, when you look at transactions and opportunities, right? It just makes them more challenging to try and bridge that gap. And that's why I go back to that point: is value versus growth, right? Which are you willing to give up on? And I think you're going to have that dynamic play out quite aggressively over the next 24 months.
But those who are fortunate to have aircraft that are coming available in the next 2 to 3 years, that could pay off very nicely. So
thank you, Jeff.
One last question, I think, before we leave, that actually came from the audience. Quickly, your views on the regional and turboprop space, which is an important segment as well. We shouldn't forget. Although I guess we touched a little bit on it through the Chinese production.
I'm not sure Gerry and I are the guys to talk about that. I'm not in that space at all, and that's probably a separate roar for regional and turboprop. So
Awesome. All right. Well, Gerry, sorry, go ahead. One last parting words.
Thank you very much, everybody who watched. I appreciate it.
I was going to agree with Jeff. My Christmas wish is a bit more peace in the world would be great, and a bit more
here.
Just everyone calm the hell down a little bit more around the world would be fantastic, and I think we'd be in a better place, because we've a lot to look forward to. There's a lot of cool things happening. There's a lot of great places to go and see. There's a lot of fantastic people around the world. We're in a fantastic industry where we get to meet brilliant and exciting new people all the time,
Thanks, Gerry.
including two people here.
Thank you.
Yep.
Don't
Happy
forget
holidays,
to
everyone.
Thank you. Don't forget to go
Happy
to the
holidays.
ISTAT holidays receptions tomorrow. And thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jeff and Gerry. This was awesome. Goodbye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Happy holidays.
Thank you. Bye-bye.